Esteemed guests, welcome to our 13th Climate Change Conference by CDP Turkey. I'm Atacan Bertay, the director of Sabancı University Corporate Governance Forum, where we host actually the CDP Turkey operations. It's my privilege to be the moderator for today's panel discussion on the evolution of climate reporting from voluntary to mandatory reporting. Before we begin, I would like to provide an introduction of our guests. But before that, I would like to reflect very shortly what we have actually listened from our insightful keynote speeches. The speeches and the expertise involved in there provided a vision to actually set the stage for a thought-provoking discussion, also in our panel, I believe. The keynote speeches proved actually how timely our topic choice has been. Both speeches showcased how comparable and transparent sustainability disclosure works, hand in hand with financial statements disclosures, feeding actually critical information to capital markets and particularly to investors. And the emphasis of the importance of international standard setters working together with local authorities on standard setting and probably more importantly for capacity building in developing countries actually is a critical topic I believe we will also touch upon in our discussion. We also have seen the results from our report highlighting the importance of climate action, obviously, and the results, I believe, demonstrated the increasing need for transparent and accurate disclosure of climate-related information, and actually in the face of many risks, many climate risks. Now, I would like to introduce our distinguished panelists. First, we have Yeon Kim, Senior Manager of Corporate Relations for the UK and Worldwide Region at CDP. Yeon has been with CDP since 2012, leading the organization's global expansion and corporate engagement efforts. Her extensive experience in environmental policy and regulation, along with her previous work at UNPRI and various environmental NGOs in Korea, I believe, makes her an excellent authority on the subject of climate reporting. Then we have Tomasz Gęsinski, Sustainability Services Director at Deloitte. He has over 20 years of professional experience in sustainability, particularly in environmental and climate management, risk management, sustainability strategy and reporting, and as an expert on greenhouse gas emissions and decarbonization strategies, he has played an instrumental role in promoting risk management and sustainability within voluntary and obligatory reporting schemes across Europe. Finally, we have Simon Wong, Sustainable Governance Advisory Board member at Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership. Simon is an independent advisor on governance and sustainability with a rich background in law, corporate governance and investment. His previous roles include being a partner at Tapestry Networks, external senior advisor at McKinsey, and head of corporate governance at Barclays Global Investments. His unique perspective on governance and sustainability will prove, I believe, invaluable insights into the inspection of climate reporting and corporate governance in general. I really look forward to a lively and informative discussion on the evolution of the climate reporting and potential impacts of moving from voluntary to mandatory disclosure. We will have a structure of like 2 rounds. We will have 2 rounds of questions. In the first round, I'll start with Kim Yeon, get the CDP perspective, then I'll throw the ball to Tomasz, and we hope to hear some experiences from the field, particularly a European perspective, and finally Simon with implications of climate reporting and general corporate governance. So let me go ahead with the first round of questions and go to Yeon. Well, CDP has played a significant role in promoting voluntary disclosure, as we have seen, and like how can CDP actually adapt to continue this leading role in driving climate action and corporate transparency? So with growing regulatory momentum for mandatory environmental disclosures globally, how do you think the global implementation of mandatory disclosure will actually impact CDP's role?
So first of all, thank you very much for having me here. As you've seen, I've been working at CDP for such a long time, and during that time, I was always working with the CDP Turkey team. So Turkey holds a special place in my heart. So it's my pleasure to be here. CDP has been always very supportive of the adoption of the mandatory disclosure. When I joined CDP 10 years ago, as a young student, I remember my CEO saying, our dream is to retire early. We want climate change issues to be resolved, and we all, we just close down CDP and we will go to vacation or early retirement, or I don't know, work in different industry. I'm afraid that time just hasn't come yet. So we, as I said first, we absolutely support mandatory disclosure. Mandatory disclosure can scale the disclosure. It can hold companies accountable. However, it will provide a common baseline when CDP provides an ever-evolving progress of the market-led disclosure. How many of you have been responding to CDP for more than 3 years? If you are, please raise your hand. 5 years? Gentleman over there, do you remember how CDP questionnaire was 5 years ago? A bit simpler, yes? Yes. So even in the mere term of a decade, CDP has went through such an evolution. 5 years, 10 years, and even with coming disclosure cycle, we are already introducing new module. We are introducing the question for the plastics for the first time to our water security questionnaire. And last year, we have introduced biodiversity information into the climate change module. So the market is demanding more granular data, and the requirement is getting refined. As I said, mandatory disclosure, absolutely, big yes. However, I was just looking at Murat's presentation early on. Look at the journey, how long it took for us to get there. It is a baseline, and CDP will continue to operate as a cutting edge, encouraging companies to go above and beyond. And also, we must not forget that still the majority of the corporations are not required to respond to the climate change metrics mandatorily. So CDP will continue to provide the platform to provide a standardized data for the market, and we will work together with the local authorities, global governments to support the successful adoption of the mandatory disclosure.
Thank you very much. It's really good to remind people how fast this is evolving. And we might maybe expect the same thing happening to the mandatory reporting. So that's something probably to keep in mind. And the CDP's leading role probably will actually not change. And there will be still demand for even more detailed, more granular data and disclosure by firms. So, like the regulations on climate reporting is becoming more stringent. And it's crucial, of course, to assess the readiness of companies to meet these requirements and understand the potential benefits from their previous voluntary reporting and experiences. So I'll get my first question to Tomasz. So what may be the impact of regulatory-driven reporting and how companies already participating in voluntary schemes benefit from it? And maybe like following up on that already, in your opinion, what's the current preparedness of companies in your part of Europe for the upcoming CSRD obligatory reporting, which we have seen, you know, like in both keynote speeches?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, once more, thank you to be here. It's an honor for me and for Deloitte to be part of this beautiful event. And I would like to compare that situation to the surfing. Already companies which are privileged also and engage in CDP before to develop on the voluntary reporting on climate, they are on the edge of the very big wave, which is generating by this mandatory, as you mentioned, a lot of companies will come. This will be public and big companies will report. It means that they will need to make an effort to get there, to climb on the edge of the wave. And those companies already volunteering in reporting with CDP, they're already there. They will use this energy very efficiently because they're already on the edge. They will surf on it. They will be first. And by giving some of the examples, the very important thing at the beginning is to acknowledge climate change and be aware of it and conscious make decisions on your strategy. So like showing in the numbers, many companies already defined their targets. Majority 1.5, which is compliant with new CSRD directive, with Paris Agreement, the most ambitious plan. And it will help them already to make that decision into action. All the others which are coming, they will need that time to get to the point of what they want to do. They already know they want to decarbonize, majority with 1.5 tempo, and it is also mentioned that majority of them already know what to search for in the supply chains. It means that they will be first to go to the value chain and pick the best suppliers to make it in the most efficient way. So this is another benefit. Of course, another benefit is about employees, current and the future. It's about motivation to work. All of us, we want to have some impact, the reason to work. And of course, fight for climate and for planet is very important for actual workers and future generations which are coming. And so this is the main important things, real business benefits out of being experienced in voluntary reporting, coming to the mandatory one. And if you're asking about how companies are for example, in Poland, I would use the example. Actually, currently, about 200 companies are reporting on broad ESG topics. While CSRD will come into force in 2 years, 1.5 years, 3,000 companies, big companies, will have to report. So you can see how much already experiencing how they are privileged, because how much work is to be done still on the market. There is a tenfold growth in the number of companies that will have to learn, understand, prepare, because I must say that while talking about CSRD, it's not about reporting only. The reporting is about statements on some deeper analysis, synthesis in many places. So there is a lot of work to do on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Particularly the numbers are amazing in the sense that the coverage will really increase exponentially. And I mean, in the second round, we are going to talk about actions, but maybe I can already follow up with a small question regarding how enormous of a task is this in the sense of capacity building, right? So from like 200 going to 3,000, and this is Poland, you know, like we will have like many other emerging countries, developing countries like Turkey, where there will be lots of variation in terms of capacity. So looking to your experiences from the field, Poland, Central Europe, how do you see this happening? Like what sort of a time frame do you think, like being on the field, will take?
You know, of course, at the beginning, majority will take this kind of compliance attitude, which will guide them to do what is right, to do it. But after that, it will happen in 2 years, 2-3 years it will happen. But after that, 3 to 5 years, it will be a business sense in that reporting. First you are looking in the mirror and say, I would like to be slim, yeah, and after few times you are looking at the mirror and say, okay, let's do something about it. So I believe it will take 3 to 5 years to real change, but still this is very good. All of us need a climate change now. It's really the time to do it. And also, I would also like to say that for the, again for CDP.
I think we lost. Yeah.
On the mic.
1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Yeah. For those who were in voluntary reporting for CDP, I mean, they will be the winners of that, and like Abba says, winners take it all. So really, congratulations to all of you that you were reporting on with CDP. Thank you.
Thanks for the acknowledgement, and thanks. I would like to take this opportunity to thank all the companies which are, disclosing with CDP. So let me ask my first question to Simon. Like, climate reporting should not be seen in isolation, right? That's a critical point to make. But it's rather a part of a broader corporate governance framework. My question is, how should broader governance considerations, such as fiduciary duties, legal liability, and probably more importantly, enforcement, shape the mandatory climate reporting? So if you can share your experiences, we would really appreciate it.
Thank you, Ata. First of all, thank you so much for inviting me. It's a joy to be back in Istanbul. After about 8 years, and in particular to see my old friend, Melsa Ararat. This is my 3rd visit, and I think on each of my visits, we've met, Melsa and I. And I think the first one was the International Corporate Governance Network meeting, and we had a beautiful reception by the bridge in the water. Anyway, the weather's cooperating. I'm so pleased to be back here. And also, I'm really pleased to learn about developments here in terms of climate disclosure, water disclosure, and all of the progress made. In terms of the questions you posed, I mean, we can talk a long time about this, but I'll try to make it succinct and address 3 topics, which is 1, the sense of responsibility. We call it fiduciary duty, but just a sense of broader corporate responsibilities that's evolving. Second, the notion that as countries and companies in those countries are grappling with mandatory disclosure, what are they concerned about? Because with mandatory disclosure comes this risk of legal liability. And third, because all of us are on this unprecedented journey in terms of climate transition, how are regulators and supervisors thinking about enforcement, right? And there's some encouraging news in the third part. I mean, the first 2, but the third one, at least in terms of putting people at ease. In terms of a broader sense of responsibility, there is increasing recognition that companies need to take into account stakeholders' interests and concerns. And these developments emanate from different sources, from market participants, from societal expectations, to even changes in the law themselves, as well as through litigation and judicial decision. So kicking off, I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with this, but the CEO of BlackRock in 2018, in his annual letter to investee companies, talked about the importance of a social purpose, to balance profit with a social purpose. This was followed by another influential organization in the US, the US Business Roundtable, where in quite a significant pivot, they said that the purpose of companies, which in the past was described as principally to serve shareholders, now there's a commitment of all companies to all stakeholders. So you see that shifting. You're seeing it in the law. In the UK, it's a very interesting example because it dates back to 2006 when the Companies Act was amended. And there, it was explicitly stated that in promoting the overall success of a company, boards need to also take into account the interests of employees, as well as the impact on communities and the environment. among other things. So you're seeing that, and you're seeing also certain national regulation. And third, which is really interesting, and as a former lawyer, this actually is most intriguing to me in terms of shifting standards and approaches. There was a decision handed down in 2021 in the Netherlands with respect to Shell. And the court there says companies need to adhere to social norms, and social norms shift. And because of that, Shell as a company need to do their part to fulfill the climate pledges agreed in Paris in 2015. And that means reducing their carbon emission by 45% by 2030 globally, and also on a best efforts basis, seeking to reduce emissions in their supply chain. So those are some of the interesting developments in terms of broader sense of responsibility. Second, with respect to legal liability, I mean, we all know, and those who've tried to gather data and tried to formulate transition plans, there's a lot of uncertainty. For example, Scope 3 emissions. I want to actually share a quote from Walmart because I thought it captured the complexity quite well. So this is from the Walmart, one of the reports on their website, and it says, the emission footprint of a single t-shirt depends on the agricultural practices in the cotton field that produced the yarn, the energy used in the mill that spun the fabric, and the garment factory that sewed it, the fuel sources and efficiency of the trucks at each stage of transportation, and the choices of customer made regarding how to wash and dry the item, right? And so if you're a company and you're confronted with this, you're thinking, if I need to disclose on a mandatory basis, what's my liability? And also think about transition plan. I recently had the opportunity to look in depth at some of them. And if you look closely, you'll see more precise figures, projections up to 2030, and then a lot of big ambiguous statements in terms of, the state of enabling technologies, policies, government policies needing to be in place, customers' ability or readiness to transition, et cetera. And so, because of these uncertainties, and as a securities lawyer, I've never seen such depth of, ambiguity in terms of disclosure if you're to force companies to do that, and also the time horizon involved, up to 2050. It's quite considerable. So anyway, to speed up what I want to share, there's active debate in terms of how do you protect companies if you want them to disclose more fully from liability. Because they may be doing so in good faith, but get it wrong, right? And there are really three types of protection that companies are seeking. And here I'm referring mostly to US companies, but this is a live issue in other places, such as Australia as well. One is to provide protection to Scope 3 disclosure, because that's the one that's most uncertain and is out of the control of companies. Second is to extend, where it exists, protection for forward-looking statements to climate disclosure. And third is to provide a different basis for climate disclosure in terms of things that are submitted to regulators. So in the US, there's this distinction between a document that's furnished to the SEC versus being filed with the SEC. And those that are furnished to the SEC have less legal exposure than those that are filed. And so that's the tenor of the debate. And the ISSB, for example, has recognized this, and last October said that they will work with jurisdictions to facilitate safe harbor or legal protection for climate disclosure. The last thing, and I'll be very brief with this, enforcement. Here's the good news, and I think we're seeing this from the previous discussion. Regulators recognize that everybody's on a journey. And they want to provide assurances that so long as companies are undertaking disclosure in good faith, they will not be unduly penalized in terms of unfair enforcement in that sense. I think more than that, as we've heard, there's a lot of emphasis on capacity building and encouragement of experimentation. In the UK, for example, the Transition Plan Task Force has introduced what's called a sandbox. And a sandbox is an area where it's encouraging experimentation, both for issuers and users of the information, to road test transition plans and so that it can be shared with others. So in that sense, there's a lot of acknowledgement. And I'll close with a quote, something I heard from the Bank of England Executive Director, Sarah Breeden. And she said, "Be brave, just start." Because we're all on a journey, and don't wait until you can perfect it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Super interesting insights, and like just to relate to the discussion to the earlier points, like social norms shifting sounded like disclosure requirements shifting, and like we are with mandatory reporting, we will start from somewhere. And initiatives like CDP actually is leading the way, showing the companies the way how the norms, reporting norms or climate norms are shifting. My second takeaway was regarding the complexity and uncertainty. So the issue is particularly complex, and there are huge uncertainties given especially the how long-term of an issue is this. Of course, as the time frames go longer, the uncertainties rise. Yeah. And when companies are actually prepared by voluntary reporting, they actually get, reduce the complexity thanks to the way showed by voluntary reporting, and that also helps to reduce uncertainties in a sense, possibly. So thank you so much for your insight. So we will go into the second round of questions, and we wanted to have the discussion in the second part more on turning the reporting voluntary mandatory, like the evolution, how to change this into actual actions by companies. And my first question will go again to Ji. What does CDP want to see in mandatory disclosure regulations, which is ongoing, like they're preparing it, and how do you think is the role of robust disclosure in driving the meaningful actions from companies?
Well, thank you, Atta. Before going into that question, I just want to echo what Simon said. Transition plan is a journey. You have to admit that you have to start somewhere, and just be honest about what you don't know. Based on the CDP disclosure and CDP's own analysis, among 18,000 companies globally that report to CDP, only less than 1% of the companies have a credible transition plan in CDP disclosure. So we need to start somewhere, and you have to continuously update and communicate with your stakeholders to follow up. And to come back to how disclosure actually drives action, I want to also come back to Simon's Thomas' analogy of trying to get slim. You said, okay, take a look at your mirror. Take a look at your mirror again. But what if you've taken your exact measurement at the first instance? What if you have actually weighed yourself, measured your waistline? I always use this analogy when I try to explain how taking exact measurement help you to take actions. I always talk about my wedding day. I was trying to get into a bit smaller size wedding dress by the wedding date, and what I did, I wrote down everything I ate. I wrote down my steps. I wrote down my exercise routine. That's what CDP is trying to do. We ask you to be exactly aware of what is your perception of risks, what is your opportunities, where you can action on, when you have the clear awareness, you will have a clear action plan. And in terms of the robust mandatory disclosure, there are 5 principles that we believe that constitutes a robust regulation on the mandatory disclosure. I have it written down because so that I don't want to be told of my communications team. So CDP says environmental integrity must be included. So climate change issues cannot be isolated from other environmental issues. You cannot address climate change without talking about water security or deforestation. So interconnectedness between these environmental impacts needs to be addressed in the mandatory disclosure regulation. And the common international baseline must be agreed. I was so pleased to see in Murat's presentation earlier that you are already aligning with the international standards, and that is absolutely critical for us to action at the scale that is needed for the urgency of the problem that we are facing. And to follow on and also to drive action, the enforcement mechanism needs to be there. So we need a mechanism to monitor what companies are disclosing, but also we need measures for companies who are not compliant with the regulations. And also regulation should focus not only on the risks, but also on the forward-looking metrics. So the regulation must look into the temperature trajectory and the short, medium, and long-term action plans and the transition plans. And finally, and I think this is the most important point, regulation must not act as a ceiling or a tick box exercise. It must be a minimum exercise for companies to start with, and it should stimulate companies to go above and beyond. And it shouldn't be a mere compliance exercise. Companies need to be stimulated to do their best.
Thank you so much. I think it's really important to recognize you can't really take action for something you don't know. So disclosures are sort of the first step to have a full plan and actually lead to action.
Old quote never gets old.
Exactly. And like ensuring the mandatory disclosure regulations are actually effective to promote climate action, a clear understanding of the role of disclosure and how it drives change is critical, I think. So let me go ahead with my second question to Tomasz. What's needed to support well-prepared and transparent recording on climate? And how can this lead to actual climate action by companies?
Yeah, so coming back to the amount of how long is the journey to be taken, I will just only mention that in the CSRD directive, there's 1,144 data points, single data points on information, either qualitative or quantitative. And out of this, 400 is obligatory. Can you imagine how much work is to be done, especially this is just to be also taught very well what we want to report, referring to the risk, to transparency, to credibility that was mentioned. In Deloitte, we believe that the starting point is the understanding and attitude. So we also start with some clients, like we call it climate capsule, so that we are sure that the whole board is on the same page. Because actually what we see, that some people on the top, some believe, some don't believe, some hesitate, some want to be leaders, some want to be followers. We are not a team. And to really to do it well, we should be on the same page and to understand the risks, the need for change the same way. So I would call it climate capsule. Let's take all those guys and women who are, most of them, including me, studying in 80s and 90s. We need to learn and back to school in that topic, which is new, even though it started in the 70s. We are not studying that yet. And then, as it said, that failure and success start in the planning phase. So I believe that this needs to be after we are already calibrated and we believe, okay, we want to fight for the climate. Okay, of course we want to do it according to the regulations. Okay, we want to win the game. And then, as there are so many questions and so many questions to be answered, we need to plan them carefully. What now, what within a half year, what we will answer in a year time. Because we are not ready to digest this elephant today. This is too big. So I believe consciousness, common attitude, calibrated in the top management, and then thorough plan. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Like starting from somewhere is critical, and increase the inclusion, of companies reporting regarding
and
the.
I maybe just add, if many of you remember when we've been studying, and we had this big exam to be taken in 3 months, and we know that there are 3,000 pages we need to read and understand. How to start it? You remember that. Confused mind says no, so we need to start this journey.
And don't leave studying to the last minute.
Yeah.
Like one of my research areas, well, the main one is banking. And when you talk about number of questions to be answered, regulation and supervision on banks is just huge. So this compliance cost and the trade-off between this compliance cost and the benefits is, of course, critical, but it's also important to remember how big the risks and benefits are when we are talking about climate change. To get into my next question, actually, one of the points you made regarding having the board, having the management on the same page is indeed critical. That will also be related to my next question to Simon. So, and one of my favorite topics, executive remuneration, compensation. So to what extent is executive remuneration being reconfigured to spur climate action? Right, so we can relate it to Tomáš's points that first all the managers and the board should be on the same page, understand what's going on, and of course we can go beyond that, providing the right incentives through compensation, which can lead to action.
Thank you. So I recently had the opportunity to study compensation arrangement at companies that have committed to net zero, to see to what extent and how they incorporate climate-related KPIs to support their net zero transition. But before doing that, I actually like to respond to some of the comments from Yeon and Tomáš. So first of all, in terms of forward-looking disclosure and also ensuring that it's integrated into the business, I think the good news is this, that one reason why companies feel a stronger sense of responsibility and have greater attention to environmental and other societal issue is because it's become very material. If you look at the disclosure by companies and look at how their risk dashboard, for example, climate change has raced up very quickly. And as a result, it is something that is very top of mind. They may not disclose it immediately, but they're definitely grappling with it within the boardroom, in the C-suite. So that's one. Second, I myself have been drinking from what I call a fire hose in terms of understanding sustainability, climate science. And so I've been a student again, and it's been energizing. But the reason I mentioned that, just following from what you just said, is a lot of climate science is not new. As Mirat said, as early as 1972, those predictions in limits to growth, they're coming true. In the 1970s, Exxon scientists predicted with remarkable accuracy how much global warming would occur given the rise in concentration of GHG. Third, and there's a lot of resources. So my personal goal is to try to understand the climate science. And MIT has a great website to do that. Just look, climate science, MIT. And as early as the late 19th century, they had scientists who predicted with remarkable precision how much global warming would occur, given corresponding rise in carbon dioxide. So it's out there, it's not new, but maybe we need to change our mindset and realize that this is something that we have to really address. to answer your question now, apologies for the digression. It's been very interesting. And I haven't thought enough to think what is the optimal mix. But in terms of incorporating climate change KPIs to support net zero transition. But companies are experimenting with different formulations, different structures. And so one is, the first thing you think about is, okay, who should these KPIs apply to? And the obvious one is the CEO, right? And you do see that. But you do see others who do it a bit more broadly. Right? If they have a management board, they say, we'll do that. Or in the case of, for example, Aviva, which is a UK insurer, it's to the entire 12-member executive team, including individuals such as the chief people officer, chief information officer. I tend to think that is actually very helpful because it's a collective, it's a whole of enterprise endeavor, climate transition. And you want to build in this collective accountability. So I think that that's very helpful. You're also seeing short-term and long-term in terms of, for example, DSM, a Dutch nutrition company, 50% of the long-term incentive program will be determined through climate-related KPIs. GHG reduction and energy efficiency improvement in that case. You can also have short-term incentives built that include climate KPIs. And you think, wait a second, we're talking about 2050, why do we need to worry about annually? Well, if you have a certain progression that you'd like to achieve in your long-term transition plan, you want to be able to track that. So that's one way to do it. The other thing is, okay, we have the KPIs, how much should they matter, right? And you have those that are nominal to DSM, which is 50%. And I tend to think you want something to be material, so 15, 20, 25% would be a good kind of rule of thumb, I suppose. And then again, you have the metrics. What should you measure? GHG emissions, particularly scope 1 and 2, is very common and is more straightforward. Renewable energy is also quite common. Renewable energy percentage, I should say. And then you have perhaps industry-specific. An automaker might have what's called a CO2 emission tank to wheel. You know, so how efficient, basically, is the engine. And the last thing is, you're saying, okay, how do we make it stretching, right? I mean, one way is to tie it to a net zero transition plan, preferably validated, right, SBT-based, because that gives you at least a pathway that's seen to be sufficiently stretching. But also, really interestingly, I'm seeing companies using the KPIs to accelerate the transition. So there was one company where they've been fortunate and they're able to now realize their 2030 targets in 2025. And they say, okay, we don't think we should reward something that's already achieved. So in order for you to earn the full 100% payout under this KPI, you have to even get there faster in terms of transition. So I'll stop.
Thank you very much for your insights. So you sort of mentioned at the beginning of your speech, the academic studies and how they informed us, actually. Let me put my academician hat on and remind that, like, these disclosures are very informative, of course, for firms and how they form their targets. It's also like food for the academicians, actually, to provide the analysis, which in turn will motivate with results and how this climate initiatives have actual real outcomes, and that provides more awareness and I think more incentives, not just like related to KPIs as well as actually financial outcomes. So please, this is for, of course, for public authorities. Like the more public the data gets, the better analysis we do. So I, will continue to raise this issue in each and every opportunity.
So as an academic, of course, that's really helpful to you. But I would say that being compelled to disclose or even disclosing it actually impacts internal decision making. So for example, the board has to discuss what payout per each KPI does an executive deserve? And then the organization needs to then think about it. So it cascades down. So the benefits are beyond just external.
Exactly. Just from like someone looking from outside, like when you can do the analysis within the firm, but of course when you get all the firms together, we will have much more information to inform the firm decision making. So I would like to express my gratitude to our panelists, and please join me to give a round of applause. I can't really applaud, but I hope you find the discussion useful, fruitful, and I believe moving forward, like the evolution from voluntary to mandatory reporting, the firms will also get more motivated with the voluntary reporting as well. So, thank you very much for your attention, and fine.